Ahoy, how's it going, y'all? Today we'll be talking about the ID, JAMMY, and it is one of probably the worst Wayland IDs in the game. Unfortunately, even though less competitive players seem to enjoy JAMMY a lot, I personally feel it's really weak. The big reason why is because its card pool is so limited. Even though they printed all the Sacrifice, Audacity, Success cards, all of them are pretty awful. Well, Audacity is pretty good, but you don't need JAMMY to play Audacity anyway. Really, the only card that truly synergizes well with JAMMY is none other than OBP that you see here. Unfortunately, this is so restrictive because it basically holds you into playing Fast Advance with JAMMY, and that is easily countered by a wide range of runner cards, as you all know by now. Employee Strike, for example, turns off your ID ability, which means that sacrificing agendas becomes so much more bad, which in turn means that you probably don't want to use your OBP anymore. You basically just blank your entire reason why you played this deck. Clot is another thing that can easily stop you in your tracks. Clone chip with Clot Threat is basically impossible to stop for you. You need to pack hate cards like Chronos Project, like Arc Lockdown, and that just bloats up your deck. And once you've dealt with the Clot Threat, with 3 Cyberdexes and best defenses for Sacrificial Construct and everything, you have to worry about everyone's worst enemy, Poly-O. Now, Poly-O harms OBP like no other. It's worse than Sansan City Grid because with Sansan Grid, at least you get to score a Weegendi before Poly-O can has a window to fire. But with OBP, you need to use a click to advance your agenda while OBP is res, giving your opponent, the runner, a chance to pop their Poly-O and waste their agenda that you just sacked to res the OBP. So many awful things can happen to Jamison, and you just don't have the deck slots to cover all of the hits. So you're just better off playing some other Fast Advance mechanic. As a matter of fact, even Titan Fast Advance is way better than JAMMY. Titan can run Trick of Light and Atlas Chain to Victory. This is such a much more solid plan because once you've scored your first Atlas, you basically just chain into the rest because scoring the Atlas gives you the momentum to score your next agendas and the tutor ability. This doesn't happen with JAMMY. In fact, your agendas probably don't do much as JAMMY. Or either that, or you have to play those really big 5/3 agendas like Graph that adds to your agenda density. So a lot of big problems with JAMMY, and it's why Titan is just a far more competitive deck, and just a much better Fast Advance option for Wayland in general. And if you're still not convinced that JAMMY sucks, look no further than all these short forms I've been using: JAMMY, OBP, Poly-O. These are absolutely disgusting, and you have every right to be disgusted at me for using them repeatedly. With all that said, one of my valued Patreon supporters, Matt, actually came up and not just asked me to play Jamison, but also didn't just talk the talk, but also walk the walk by giving me a deck list that I've been trying out for some time, as well as a write-up about it. Now, I am still not convinced that JAMMY is good, but I must commend Matt for his wonderful effort. And the biggest thing is, this effort is actually pretty good in the sense that it mitigates a big problem that I identified earlier, that Jamison is simply too weak against too many runner hate cards. Matt perfectly covered all these hate cards with some counter solutions in one way or another. Corporate Town, for example, deals with political operative and the Sacrificial Construct used to defend Clot as well. So very nice dual use there, and the bunch of 2 advanced agendas, Hostiles and Standoffs, perfectly deal with the Employee Strikes as well. So a lot of good synergy in this deck. Actually, I shouldn't use the word synergy. A lot of thought in this deck, accounting for the runner meta. However, unfortunately, if there's one thing I feel lacking, is that because of all this extra spice that was put in this deck, the synergy was lost as a result. That's right. If you notice, this deck actually contradicts itself, and this is why Jamison is arguably only tier 3, tier 4 at best. It definitely can't be competitive right now because of the anti-synergy in this deck. You look at the deck being so agenda heavy, no defensive agendas at all. In fact, it's very porous because of all the standoffs inside, and look at how much early ice you have. Almost no early ice and only 13 ice to boot. 13 ice is definitely not enough if we are going to play a glacier style deck, which this deck tries to do with priority construction and giving you an alternative option to fast advance. Well, your alternative option isn't going to be very good if you're only running 13 ice. Not to mention also that your glacier option will be further hampered once you start scoring those hostile takeovers. With no way to remove the bad pub, you are going to be stuck with servers that the runner can run in for a lot cheaper. So much for the reverse accounts too. So yeah, the deck just basically eats itself, which is very, very unfortunate. So I set out to tweak this deck because it still had a lot of potential. Matt put a lot of good effort into making this, and I think it would be really unjustified if I didn't put in some effort myself. So I went to tweak it a bit, but just to no avail. No matter what I did, whenever I tried to short one weakness, for example, putting Elizabeth Mills into the deck to counter the bad pup, it just opens several more weaknesses, and I just don't have the deck slots to fix everything. Either I try to do too many things with the deck and end up doing badly at all of them, jack of all trades, master of none, or I purely end up with a deck that can only do fast advance, which completely dies to clot. So I was just not having it. And I just sat down one day and said, why am I doing this? Why am I even trying to build a Jamison deck? I look at the idea again, and I thought to myself, this is more than just a fast advance enabler. Jamison is a positive tempo ID. Even though you are forfeiting your win condition, it actually gives you tempo in return. Even though you are losing time to score these agendas that are just forfeited, you gain time because these advancements that you get with Jamison's ability are free in terms of clicks, in terms of credits. You don't need to pay for these advancements you get from Jamison's ability. So if you can leverage on this positive tempo to surge you to the finish line of 7 agenda points, you could be onto something. And that's where I came up with my deck. The idea is still to turbo rush out. There's no late game whatsoever. As such, I removed the priority construction. This is the one Wayland deck you won't see me run priority construction in. I absolutely love that card to death, but this is not the deck for it. Instead, this deck leans very heavily on the 2 forfeit ice that are currently in the Wayland faction. Tithonium and Archer. 3 copies of each, and all the 2 pointers to sack them to, sorry, not 2 pointers, the 2 1s and 2 0s to sack them to. So the idea is this. You keep pumping out agendas in your remotes. If the runner runs your remote Archer or Tithonium, they are going to get stopped by them, and you get rewarded for the runner's aggression because you suddenly have advancement tokens on the never advance agenda in your remote that you are now trying to score. That's the idea behind this. You are playing never advance behind these heavy ice. If they run it, you are getting tempo and keeping them out at the same time. If they don't run it, well, you just slowly score those agendas and win. Now, sometimes they can get past the Tithonium and Archers with their tools. Well, that's where your defensive upgrades come in. Marcus Batty is potent in combination with these 2 ice. Navi Grid thwarts any David attempt or any SMC attempt. So this can easily tide you through the early to mid game, or at least that's my thinking. Signal jamming obviously is anti-anarch, stops the conspiracy breakers from coming off the bin. So that is the idea behind this deck, and we'll see if I can actually put it into practice, or if just like my theory crafting goes, Jamison just sucks and this won't have anything to do with victory. Let's see. It's time for Fun in the Sun as we are up against Sunny. Well, I mulligan into a hand that seems pretty decent. Some money, lots of ice, and a Marcus Batty. So, we know that HQ is not going to be in danger anytime soon, so we get the end run remote, the Architect on R&D, and we brace ourselves ready to score an agenda soon. As my opponent dips down to 0 credits to install their resources, I knew that I had to go fast. Jamison is all about going fast, and especially against Sunny, where late game is basically unwinnable for Jamison. Getting this early tempo is huge, so I'm looking to score an agenda right now. Unfortunately, no agenda, so I have to wait for turn 3. Except that on turn 3, all I have are fake agendas. Standoff. Really? Really? I mean, come on. When I need an actual agenda, you give me standoff. Not the best start, no. On the bright side though, standoff will allow me to rest the Archer that is on my remote right now, and that's kind of a big deal because that archer can now be res and it's going to prove to be a problem against for my opponent. So time to score the first standoff. But I'm thinking here, if I score it right now, my opponent will surely trash the security chip to the standoff, and I want my standoff to trigger. So I'm going to stand off here, and my opponent refuses to trash either of their 3 resources, which allows me to gain 5 credits and draw a card. So I basically just wanted this forward tempo, which is why I played the best defense before the security chip first. Last click was Ice HQ, because I did not want the Batty to die. So my opponent installs Nexus and starts running HQ. I don't want to spend 9 credits to rest the Titanium here, nor do I want to sack the standoff, which I want to dedicate to the archer on the remote instead. So I allow my opponent to run HQ 3 times. They get the fake agenda, which is completely fine by me. I don't need to score another one of those. But the problem is they are accumulating turning wheel counters. So I really need to be careful about this. I cannot let my opponent run HQ indefinitely because the turning wheel is going to stack up and cause lots of problems for me. I'm still not finding real agendas. This is ridiculous. I found both fast tracks. The reason why I don't want to use fast track here is because my opponent has a Nexus out. It's very risky to score agendas when your opponent can bypass your archer. So yeah, I'm really not interested in rezzing the archer here. This is one problem with regards to playing with archer. Perhaps it's my gameplay mistake. Maybe my last turn should have been to fast track Atlas, install Atlas, and then hard rest the archer and Enigma on that run. I probably should be playing more boldly with regards to these forfeit agenda ice. I was hoping to save it for when my opponent does actually install their breakers, but turns out to be a mistake. Anyway, my opponent runs R&D after using Nexus on Enigma, which basically feeds me a free Architect Fire. Too bad my opponent wasn't expecting Architect out of Wayland. Turns out it's pretty good. So I get a huge boost because not only do I revive my Batty from the dead, my opponent trashed it just now on the remote run, I also get a global food into the remote. It's not the ideal agenda. I'd rather an Oaktown or an Atlas here, but I can't complain. That's going to be 3 points that my opponent cannot get. They are too poor. They only have Nexus. So this food is basically free for me as my opponent spends next turn setting up. So with the food out of the way, I can now viably use both fast tracks to fetch Atlases to win the game. This is why I wanted to hold on to the Atlases initially, but maybe I should be more aggressive with them, because in any case, my opponent is starting to go out of control. They're getting 2 guaranteed credits a turn between Symmetrical Visage Draw and Data Folding, and now that's just doubled. They've just installed Mr. Phones and another Data Folding, so a lot of money is coming their way. I better get this Atlas out of the way. I can happily show it to them, knowing that when they start that turn on 3 credits, they are very unlikely to install Striker and run. So they need to install GS Striker, which is the decoder, run my remote, and win the side game on Batty. Remember, the Batty side game can trigger off the Archer, which can cause a lot of problems. So unfortunately, I did not see this play coming. My opponent ran HQ. I was like, I need to save my money for scoring the Atlas. I'm not going to res. They play Maxwell James. So obviously, you don't want to res your Archer here, especially with so many standoffs in the runner's score area. I know that once I res this Archer and they de-res it, it's not really coming back anymore. So I rather not res it here. Instead, I'll let my opponent hit the Enigma, knowing that if they Nexus through it, I can still play the Batty side game at the end, and with a 2 in 3 chance end the run. So I allow them to get to the Enigma, and I allow them to Nexus Trace, and I'm banking on the Batty here, because with the Batty Fire, I'll be up to 5 point. Oh. Yeah. That's something they can do. Yeah, yeah. Well, that was a big mistake. So the correct play, the ideal play in that scenario would have been to fire the Marcus Batty before my opponent even approached the Enigma. I allowed my opponent to encounter the Enigma, which after that they were able to use Maxwell James, and I couldn't re-res the Enigma. This left me with no end-run routines to fire for Batty, and my Batty goes down the drain along with the 2 agenda points to my opponent. This was a serious misplay. Even bigger than my opponent running to Architect on R&D. Both of us made big mistake each, but mine was bigger because as the corp against a inevitable late game runner, you have a very narrow window that you have to take advantage of, and mine just disappeared right there. My opponent is going to become really rich from this point on, and it's going to be a struggle to win the game from now on. I'm basically banking on fast advance at this point, which is why the Oberth protocol in server 1 is going to either make or break the game for me. Let's see whether I can do that. Yeah, this that was really not ideal there, that Atlas. Okay, hostile takeover. Interesting. Better get that scored. Question, do I rest the Oberth protocol here? Tough one. Maxwell James is off the table, so I can actually rest Archer on remote pretty freely now. I give it a think and I decide that it's not really worth it to rest the Oberth protocol here, because if my opponent somehow manages to get in the remote and trash the Oberth, I'm really not in a better position than when I started off. Remember, resing the Oberth will cost me the standoff, and resing the Archer that's protecting the Oberth will cost me the hostile that I scored. So my opponent, I basically wouldn't have gained any agenda points, and my opponent would be one bad publicity up. So this is why I was playing conservative with the Oberth. Ideally, I only use it when I need to fast advance a big agenda. My opponent runs R&D here. Nexus True Architect finds the second Atlas. Bloody hell. On a single axis, no less. This really hurts. I really needed that Atlas because that was an easy fast advance on the Oberth protocol. If I drop the Atlas, click 1, rest the Oberth protocol, I'm able to place one advancement counter on using Jemison, and another advancement would get me the ability to score the Atlas, and one extra advancement over that will give me the Atlas counter needed to tilt out the final hostile for the win. Basically, if I top deck that Atlas there, I was virtually guaranteed the victory because I would be on 6 points and I would be able to tilt out the hostile takeover. This is how hair thin things can get. Now my opponent disabled my ID ability with Employee Strike, and I can't have Employee Strike disabling my ID, and I knew R&D would be locked from this point on, so I tilted up a hostile takeover with fast track, just to get rid of the E-Strike. This meant that I actually needed to rest the Oberth protocol here, sacking my standoff. Not much I can do about that. I just needed to desperately get rid of the E-Strike. I had no choice there. Well, I finally caved in now that I'm rich enough to rest the Titanium on HQ because I am sick and tired of these stupid turning wheel runs. So, my opponent has to Nexus through it, and this means they can't repeatedly run HQ to farm turning wheel counters. Again, this is not looking good for me. I have a rest Oberth, so that could help a lot, but R&D needs to hold. I need to top deck the last Atlas. That is a tall order. Of course, this means that I also need to protect the Oberth, which is going to be easier said than done if my opponent runs it. They don't. So, I'm going to draw. I see a food here. That's my ticket to victory. But with only 2 clicks left, what are my options? I could install Advance It, which would place 2 advancement counters on it, thanks to Oberth's ability. However, with only an Archer and an Enigma guarding an agenda that is obviously an agenda, that sounds like a stupid plan. So my only other option was to jam the global food and install the vanilla on the remote to further protect it. Now, this doesn't mean I can't score it next turn. On the contrary, with what I said about this deck, if I can force my opponent to run the remote unsuccessfully, I would be able to rest the Archer, which would allow me to sack one of my existing hostiles to place advancement counters on food. This converts my squad hostile into forward tempo for me to win on the next turn. So that is the plan I'm aiming for here, hoping my opponent trips up, make a mistake by running the remote when they can't break all 3 ice, and then score the food. Surely that can't be too hard, can it? So yeah, basically my fate in this game, I've left it in my opponent's hands, and this is a position you never want to be. You want to be in full control of your own destiny. And this is kind of why, again, going back to what I said earlier, why I don't really like Jemison. Because if you are, leaning on these forfeit agenda ice to make your forward tempo work, well, guess what? You're at the mercy of your opponent, short of playing effects that actively res your ice, which will cost you more deck slots and are probably not that good. So once again, not enough good synergy with Jamison's ability, coupled with the fact that it isn't within your control, makes it all the more worse. Right now I'm just sitting here twiddling my thumbs and waiting for my opponent to make the decision. I mean, I could have tried to go for the score. As I said, install an advanced global food without the vanilla outside, but given that my opponent's so rich, and given that they have basically drawn half the deck at this point, you have to expect that by this time they've found at least one of either the killer or the decoder, which will allow them to get past the remote in tandem with the security nexus. So yeah, I mean, there was no way I was going to score this food out in time without relying on my opponent running an archer. And if they don't run my archer, well, I can score the global food in 2 turns. But what would that require? Me to stay alive for the next 2 turns. Again, easier said than done. R&D is still pretty agenda heavy. My opponent continues contemplating on the next turn. It's pretty difficult. They have to decide between R&D and the remote. Or they can wait for another turn. But they can't because I'm on 5 agenda points. This could be the last Atlas. So they finally make the decision. Starting the turn, they run HQ first. Very interesting move because I was thinking they might have a second Maxwell James, but no. They are letting the Tithonium fire and suddenly all makes sense. They are going to get another turning wheel counter, putting them at 8. This allows them to access 5 cards on R&D and win the game if they find any 2-point agenda due to freedom of quality. You'll note that Tithonium's last set routine did not do anything because they have a Fall Guy installed. That tech helps so much here because the Fall Guy protected that turning wheel, which I would have otherwise trashed with Tithonium. So very nice play by my opponent because the final card they accessed with the help of that final HQ turning wheel counter turned out to be the winning agenda for them. As much as I whine about Jamison being awful, I cannot for the life of me escape the fact that I massively botched this game up, and as a result I was unable to fully showcase the potential of this deck. So they always say that hindsight is 20/20, right? Well, let's look back at this very critical turn. I'm sure a lot of you would have been furiously keyboard warrioring in your back at home right now, telling me what I should have done on this turn. And chances are, you're probably right. But for the sake of those who haven't, let's look at this turn again. My opponent runs last click to challenge my Atlas remote. There's a Batty in there. There's an Archer on the outside. There's a Res Enigma on the inside. Of course, during this game, I basically had... I had to, for some reason, take the literal worst possible move in that situation. Do nothing and just let my opponent grab an Atlas for free. Powered by my reluctance to res an Archer only to get it de-res by Maxwell James immediately. That was all my fault. But had I thunk rationally, it was quite obvious that my opponent only had 1 breaker available to them, 1 pseudo breaker at that, the Maxwell James. Nexus was off the table because they were too poor. They only had 2 credits. I could easily outtrace them for the end of run and tag them while at it. So really, the right play there would have been to res the Archer regardless. I didn't even need to worry about Marcus Batty. In fact, resing Archer may have been even better than not resing it. Because even if I get it de-res, I'm guaranteed to score the Atlas next turn. And it would have 1 Atlas counter thanks to Jamison's ability because I just sacrificed a standoff to res the Archer. So this is the forward tempo I'm talking about. And Never Advanced Atlas suddenly gets 1 agenda counter on it because my opponent foolishly runs my remote with no way to get all the way to the bottom of it. That was what should have happened. Instead, what did I do? I messed it up. So with an over advanced Atlas and a global food in my score area, I'm at 5 agenda points. All I need is 2 hostiles to win, one of which can be easily fetched by my Atlas counter. The other one I can fast track once I've sufficiently iced up HQ. This was a very, very clear win path for me. I just was completely blind to it, and it goes to show that you can't use your natural Netrunner instincts. I have a lot of natural Netrunner instincts ingrained to me after so many years. What is it? 4 years and counting of playing this game? Well, it's time to keep up with the times. Clearly, this old dog needs to learn some new tricks, and Jamison teaches him that. Yep, thanks everyone, and hopefully you've learned something as well, if you're one of the old dogs like me. In the meantime, as always, thanks for watching, and happy night running. I'll see you next time.